Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan. I'm the Houston part.
And I'm Dave Hogan, and hello, Randy.
Howdy. How are you?
Better than snuff and not nearly as dusty. I never did know quite what that meant, but my grandmother would always say that. My grandma Trantham. How are you, Granny? Better than snuff and not nearly as dusty.
A friend of mine, Larry Keith, forwarded me a jingle, an old YouTube video of Lester Flatt. If your snuff's too strong, it's wrong. Get two bros, get two bros. It'll keep you smiling all day long. Get two bros, get two bros.
You have a good memory. And those singing radio commercials were, that was a big thing for a while. But let's talk a little bit about commercials. You and I have done thousands of them, maybe even tens of thousands of them.
Yes. Between
you and me down through the years. And I think I can probably attribute what success that I had in broadcasting, which was not a great deal of success, but I never did have to stand in a food line.
Yeah.
I was able to make a reasonably good living in broadcasting. But what success I had, I think I can attribute to recognizing right from the get-go, very early in my broadcast career, how important advertising was, how important commercials were. And I found, and I'm sure you've run into this too, in broadcasting, that some disc jockeys didn't like commercials. Commercials were an intrusion on their whatever they were doing, playing music or whatever. And I learned right off the bat that commercials paid the bills. So I developed very early on an interest in doing the very best I could for the advertiser. And as you know, I ad-libbed most of the advertising that I did on my shows. Many times the salesperson would go out and sell a restaurant, or I got a lot of free meals that way too. You know. But the sales rep for the radio station would go out and sell advertising, then come back in and say, Dave, I want you to go to so-and-so auto place or restaurant or whatever the business was, get to know the people. And I'd do that. I'd go get to know the people. And I'm proud to say that when I retired from my broadcasting career, and they had a little get-together for me, a majority of the people there were people who had been my advertisers on my show. That was when I was working for WJCW in Johnson City.
What an honor. What a tribute.
And that really made me feel good.
Yes.
But advertising is important, and I, just as a matter of curiosity, searched for the very first radio commercial. Now, in the early 1920s is when radio was getting started. Back then, most of the radio was what we call, I guess, ham radio operators. But then the first commercial radio station went on the air in Pittsburgh, KDKA. So you would think that the first radio commercial would have been on the first commercial radio station. And I was a little confused when I read that the first radio commercial was actually on a station in New York, WEAF in New York. And the first advertiser was a 15-minute real estate ad offering apartments for sale in Jackson Heights in Queens. And then I got to thinking, well, if KDKA was the first commercial radio station going on the air in 1920, and the first commercial was in August of 1922 on another radio station, I could not quite understand. Do you?
No, I don't.
I do. I found out.
Tell us.
Okay. The first radio station, commercial radio station, as I said, it was KDKA in Pittsburgh. It was owned by Westinghouse. The federal, I don't think they called it the Federal Communications Commission until later, but the government entity that began to supervise broadcasting radio granted them the first commercial license. It was Westinghouse. Westinghouse was a manufacturer of radios. They had a number of different locations: Springfield, Massachusetts, Pittsburgh, and several other cities. They got this radio station for broadcasting in-house to their
manufacturing facility?
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't know that.
They didn't run commercials. So when the word commercial, as it relates to KDKA, was actually talking about the government licensing the first company, the first
franchise.
Yeah. But private company.
So it was to Westinghouse.
Yeah, Westinghouse.
Who have multiple locations, multiple manufacturing facilities, and they're manufacturing radios, AM radios at that time.
And they were dead set against running commercials.
Really?
And then it got to the point where it became more and more, the radio manufacturing business became very competitive. Other companies like RCA, Crosley, and other companies started making radios. And so Westinghouse started struggling, having a hard time.
Competing.
Yeah, competing. And then in little less than 2 years after KDKA went on the air, WEAF in New York, as I said, ran the first radio commercial. And I believe it was American Express Company that ran the second radio commercial.
Wow.
So radio advertising started to take off, and in about a 3-month period, WEAF in New York, which is now a sports station on that frequency, WFAN, the fan.
80, maybe, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either, but somewhere one of those low frequencies.
Right.
So the competitiveness of broadcasting started showing up in the picture, and radio stations started scrambling as to how they could make this profitable. And in about 3 months, WEAF took in $550. Now, $550 in 1922 was a heap side of money.
Yes. By selling advertising.
Yeah, by selling advertising, and so advertising began to take off at these other radio stations. And people saw, hey, they got a radio station, they're making money. And so radio stations started springing up.
Yeah.
And the Federal Communications Commission, the government, started authorizing stations to go on the air all across the country. But the Westinghouse station, KDKA, they started running public programs like, I think they were the first to broadcast election results, and they broadcast music concerts, had an in-house band, but they didn't carry commercials until later on. They fought it right up till about 1925, I believe, before they started running commercials on their radio station. And newspapers saw radio as a big competitor for advertising dollars and for breaking news, which newspapers couldn't do.
Right.
So the newspapers went to the wire services like Associated Press was one of them. I don't know if United Press was in the picture at that time or not, but there were several wire services that provided news to the newspapers. So the newspapers went to these wire services and worked out a deal with them that they would not allow radio stations to use their news from the wire services until it was printed in the newspaper. The newspaper got first dibs on printing news stories. And what did radio stations do? They started forming their own news organizations.
Okay.
And to get around that. So they started hiring news people, journalists. And so that's a little history of early radio and radio commercials. Now, you and I, as I said a few minutes ago, we've done thousands of radio commercials down through the years. And I was wondering, maybe you know, I don't, why radio commercials became known as spots.
Spots. I got 8 spots this half hour. I got 8 live spots this half hour. I don't know why it's called
Hey,
spots.
Randy's Restaurant bought 5 spots this week.
Yeah.
So
got a spot load that's heavy this week. Spots.
Somehow that term came to define usually 30 or 60-second
spots
commercials.
Yeah.
Sometimes 10 seconds even. But most often 30 and 60-second commercials. And this is the most common form of radio advertising. The first, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the first radio advertising was a 15-minute real estate ad. And also sponsoring programs, a form of advertising where the sponsor would buy 15 minutes or 30 minutes or even an hour and sponsor that segment on the radio. And I can recall a few of those, and a lot of religious programs.
Right.
Were 30-minute programs or 15-minute programs where a minister or a church would buy time on the radio station. I read where KDKA, there was, I think it was an Episcopal church, broadcast a Sunday service from like 1925 until 1962.
Wow.
That same broadcast ran on KDKA in Pittsburgh. So programs are a common form of advertising. Let's talk a little bit about on-location broadcasts, commonly called remotes in the business, and that's where we go out and broadcast on location. And we both had experiences there.
Oh, you can bet. I've spent many hours in a radio station van in some parking lot somewhere trying to convince people to come down here and buy this car, buy this house, buy this 6-pack of Pepsi for 99 cents or whatever. We sold everything in the world. I've often been chided about my ability in sales, but you know, when you put it in the terms that you've already put it in this morning about how important sales is to the radio career, if you're doing your job in that vein of thinking, you're always selling something. You are trying to motivate people, the people who are listening to this radio station right now. You're trying to motivate them to go somewhere and buy something. And the old adage is nothing happens till a salesman sells something. And if you can sell your listeners into buying, or just a portion of your listeners, you know, if there's 1,000 people listening to you this afternoon, 99% of the stores that you're advertising for couldn't stand 1,000 people in their store at one time. You're just wanting to motivate a tenth of them to go try this product.
Farmer Rush, you remember him.
Russell Offenhauser, I believe. Offhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Farmer Russ, a great radio personality here.
Well known in the Asheville area for many years, and I worked with him on WSKY. And he would say something like, I had rather have 1,000 listeners and be able to convince 20 of those listeners to do what I say than to have 5,000 listeners and be able to convince nobody.
He was spot on, man.
Yeah.
Spot on. Because those 20 that you motivate to go in that store will say something to the owner, and he'll realize that his advertising dollars are being well spent on that radio station.
The most remotes, I guess, that I've ever done for one particular segment of business was auto dealers.
Me too.
Probably auto dealers. And those were fairly easy remotes to do because usually there was a certain amount of traffic that an auto dealer always has.
Built-in traffic.
But a difficult remote, and I've had a few of those, and I'm sure you have too, is to go out and broadcast for a business that's kind of secluded and not a business that has a normal normal amount of traffic anyway. Those are the tough ones. And you would go on the air, and there'd be nobody around, and your job, and you've got the owner of the business standing there.
Who has just spent a lot of money.
You're smiling, Randy. You're smiling. You've been there, done that.
I'm starting to sweat. You see that brow? You see that on my brow right there?
I've got Dave Hogan or I've got Randy Houston in my store, and I've decorated, and I've got free cake for everybody, and I've got free soft drinks for everybody. And there's nobody there when you start, and that owner is expecting you to fill his store with people. Now, you talk about pressure.
It's immense. I mean, it's strong when you're in those situations, and we've both been there a million times.
And, of course, usually you have some giveaways.
Yeah.
You're giving away tickets to some concert, or you're giving away hats or your T-shirts, you're giving away something. And you always had these people, a few of them, maybe half a dozen, that would come to your remote no matter where you were if you were giving things away. So you're standing there, and it's a 3-hour remote, and you have broadcast for an hour, and you've had nobody show up. Now, these people that would show up every remote usually aggravated you. You know, they hung around. You hated to see them coming. But now if you stand in that store for an hour and nobody's been there, you start looking around for those people. Where are they? Where are they? They're not here yet. Come on down.
One of Randy's tricks in that situation was always to start talking about the residuals that you're going to get off of this remote broadcast. There'll be people coming in 2 weeks from now talking about this remote broadcast that we're dying on the vine here.
Yeah, radio advertising, or any kind of advertising for that matter, is a challenge, and particularly in today's marketplace. But I always emphasize to my advertisers and would-be advertisers the importance of consistency. You don't buy just a few spots, a few commercials. I've often said I had rather you instead of spending $1,000 this week, I had rather you spread that out. I can do better for you. And I've had sponsors, small advertisers, Randy, that have stayed on my show consistently with running only maybe 2 commercials a week. And I'd run into people, I hear you talking about old so-and-so every day. Because if they hear you over a long period of time, consistently talking about them a few times a week, they get it makes an impression.
Frequency, reach and frequency. What these big advertising agencies talk to about. What's your station's reach and frequency? Okay, the frequency part of that is real. It is. I've never been a big fan of those remote broadcasts because that's 3 hours on a Friday afternoon from 3 to 6. Boom, shot, done, over with. and all your money and your advertising budget for 2 months has been locked up in them 3 people that showed up wanting a piece of pizza.
They work in certain instances, and then in addition to remotes at business places, there are other types of remotes, broadcasting a sporting event, broadcasting a concert.
County fair, yeah.
Yeah, broadcasting from the Mountain State Fair or the Appalachian Fair in Johnson City.
Right.
And what kind of promotions? I thought turkeys could fly, didn't you?
God.
Now, that's a TV commercial. WKRP in Cincinnati.
WKRP in Cincinnati. Oh,
And the big guy.
They threw live turkeys out of a helicopter.
Yeah, the big guy. And those turkeys couldn't fly, of course. Body's too heavy for they can't flap their wings. These are domestic turkeys, I'm sure, that they threw out of the helicopter. And the big guy comes in, and I swore I thought turkeys could fly. And I've often wondered if whoever the writer was of that script for WKRP in Cincinnati, the TV show, didn't get that idea from Kaz Walker. Kaz Walker used to toss chickens off of his supermarket down into the crowd.
Live chickens?
Live chickens. For those of you who don't know, Kaz Walker was an owner of a chain of grocery stores back in the day. In fact, he got Dolly Parton. He did some live television when television came into existence in the late 40s and 50s. Kaz Walker had a show, and Dolly Parton, that's the first TV show that she appeared on, because Kaz Walker was in Knoxville, that was his home, and Dolly was from Sevierville, nearby or near Sevierville. But yeah, he had all kind of promotions for his grocery stores, for his supermarkets. And one of them was, I think he did it around Christmas time, was to throw live chickens. Of course, the elevation was not like a helicopter.
No.
It was like a one-story building. And he'd hire somebody to go up there.
He was.
And I'm sure they were doing a radio remote there.
Oh, yeah, yeah. You forwarded me a video of Dolly singing at like age 12 at a Kaz Walker grocery store grand opening remote that was televised on WBIR TV in Knoxville, and WIVK in Knoxville was there. One of their personalities was doing this live remote broadcast. Kaz Walker was a character. He would have greased pig contests at the grand opening of his stores, climb a greased telephone pole, and win $100. He was a promoter. He was a P.T. Barnum of grocery store.
And he was funny to listen to. Not intentionally funny. He was just naturally funny. And the people listening to this podcast, if you want to, we all go down rabbit holes on the internet.
Yes.
Just Google Kaz Walker. That's CASWALKER. Google Kaz Walker, and you'll find some of the funniest.
You will. You really will.
Yeah. He would say things on the radio back then that I doubt you could get away with now on TV rather. But some of the things you find on internet are his TV.
Hilarious.
Oh, hilarious!
Absolutely hilarious. And Dave, over the years in radio, actually, I say this now that I've reached the ripe old age of 70. I say this around the radio station that I still work at. I ain't riding no more elephants. I ain't riding no more donkeys in a donkey softball game.
I've been there.
I ain't sitting on no Dunkin' booth with germ-infested water anymore. I'm not doing any of that stuff anymore.
But if you do change your mind and decide to ride an elephant again, don't wear shorts when you do.
the one and only time I did, it was cold as gee whiz. There was ice and snow everywhere. And Herman, I've never forgotten Herman's name. That was 40 years ago, but I still have a vivid memory of riding Herman.
And I mentioned don't wear shorts. You don't. It's not visible. You don't think of an elephant having a kind of rough
wire brush.
It's like riding a wire brush. Yeah, that's a good analogy. And I did that.
The donkey softball game. I did one of those in Black Mountain. And that donkey made an ass out of me. he would, as we say out in the country, he'd just bow up on you and wouldn't move. I can't remember. I have had a desire and fulfilled it a lot to ride aircraft. Any chance that I ever got, the Red Baron is coming through Asheville, and it's an old biplane that was the model, the logo for Red Baron Pizza, open cockpit, bi-wing steerman, helicopters of all kinds, antique aircraft, military aircraft, hot air balloons. Really understand the addiction of hot air ballooning. It's so peaceful. And
we had a hot air balloon sponsored by Pepsi at one of the radio stations in the building where I worked, and learned a lot about a few things with that hot air balloon. Number one is we got a lot of complaints from farmers because did you know that a cow cannot look straight up? True. A cow cannot look up. And so a hot air balloon, makes that sound.
Burning the gas. Yeah.
And those cattle could not see what was happening. And they would hear the sound of the hot air balloon, and they would panic.
Run.
Yeah. And so we got a lot of complaints from farmers particularly. And then you never know, you never knew where the hot air balloon would eventually land. And most people didn't mind a hot air balloon landing in their front yard, but some people did.
It's
get out the shotgun, get back, and you couldn't just take off right away. You've got a hot air balloon to attend to in that feller's front yard.
It was with Bill Norwood, that a mutual
Mr. Bill,
a mutual friend of mine and yours, and a friend of anyone who grew up in Western North Carolina in the 50s and 60s. What a great guy on WLOS TV, Channel 13, who later went into hot air ballooning. And both times that I went up with him was absolutely a blast. We were in the city, taking off over Tunnel Road and I-240, and he was such a great pilot, and we had such a good time together.
The last helicopter I rode was with the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority.
Uh-huh.
And their public relations guy called me, and they had a lot of controversy over the spraying of the power lines, the vegetation growing up around power lines. And I think they were looking for some, a positive publicity. So he called me one day and he said, we're going to be in the area. This is in the East Tennessee, Northeast Tennessee area. And we'd like to take you with us and show you some of the power lines that we have to make sure that vegetation is not interfering with. And so that was an interesting, fun ride as that helicopter would dip down real low. And you'd wonder, is he going to hit those power lines? And then he'd go back up, but it was quite an experience.
I got to fly on the Memphis Belle. This was a recreation. It was a B-17, flying B-17, named the Memphis Belle. It was the one that was actually used in the movie The Memphis Belle, and of course, you and I later became such great friends with Robert Morgan, the real pilot of the real Memphis Belle. But I got to fly in a replica of that. I got to crawl down under the cockpit and go out in the front bubble, the front gunship port. And you take a flight like that and in a machine like that had 4 750 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engines on it, just rumbling, and it could take off in such a short space, and it was so tight. There were 5 gun ports on that machine, and it was really an experience. We got to stop.
I didn't fly in the Memphis Belle replica like you did, but during one of our broadcasts with Robert Morgan out at the Asheville Regional Airport, I climbed up into the cockpit of the Memphis Belle.
Yeah, and they had the fuddy-duddy there, too.
Can you imagine being there and people shooting at you, other airplanes?
Yeah.
Man, I admire those fighter pilots.
So much admiration. We're out of time. We talked too long. We'll be back and next time we're going to talk about some of the fun radio games we've played on the air at different radio stations. Thank you, Dave.